Hello everyone, welcome to the second of our weekend webinars. In today's webinar, we're going to talk about our brainwaves. In modern personal development circles, the subject of brainwaves makes up quite a large part of the conversation. As we found out more about the brain and the mind, we've realized that if you know what brainwaves your brain is predominantly producing at any given time, you have a pretty good idea of what the brain is actually doing and what the brain is actually focusing on. So, what are brainwaves? Well, quite simply, brainwaves are the electrical activity produced by the brain as the neurons communicate with each other. The brain communicates chemically and electrically. Now, if you have a large number of neurons communicating with each other at any one time, which is generally what happens when the brain's functioning, the electrical activity is going to be strong enough to be detected outside of the skull. And this is measured via an EEG machine, an electroencephalogram. Now, we measure brainwaves according to the rate that they repeat themselves. So as the neurons fire over and over and over again as they communicate, it creates a wave of electricity. And the number of times the wave of electricity repeats itself per second is what we call the brain frequency, and its unit of measurement is the hertz. So brain frequency that repeats itself 30 cycles per second is said to be oscillating at 30 hertz. Now, we've been able to detect 7 distinct brainwave types, and they're named according to the Greek alphabet in the order that they were discovered. 4 of them we know a lot about. 1 of them we're starting to get more information on. And the other 2 we've only just managed to detect as the sensitivity of our equipment has increased. So the 4 brainwave frequencies that we are most familiar with are beta, alpha, theta, and delta. We're learning more about gamma brainwaves, and we know very little about lambda and epsilon. In this program, we'll be learning about and focusing on the 4 main frequencies that we know most about. Now, before we even talk about brainwaves, we're going to do a quick detour and discuss the subconscious mind. And that way, I can explain to you better about why we even bother about learning about brainwaves. Now, as I said before, we know a lot about what the brain is doing from the frequencies it emits. And one of the things we know is that at certain brainwave frequencies, the transfer of information from the conscious mind to the subconscious mind is much more efficient. Now, if we liken the brain and mind to a computer, the subconscious can be considered our operating system. It's the key to our beliefs, our habits and behaviors, and it is incredibly easily programmable. So much so that we can be programmed by our environment, by our experiences, and by other people very, very easily. And for the most part, this happens without our conscious awareness. So our beliefs, which ultimately govern our behavior, and in turn how we exist and function in this world, are largely programmed into us without our conscious awareness, or indeed our conscious permission. Now, it is said that the subconscious holds a vast amount of information. All the memories, experiences, and senses that you've had since you were born, whether you are or were aware of them or not, is stored in the subconscious. So a large part of who we are, our identity, our behaviors, how we present ourselves to the world, how we see the world, is stored deep within our minds. Now, the problem has always been that access to this information in a usable way has eluded us. Day to day, we function fairly automatically without the need of conscious awareness because the subconscious is very good at delivering our programming without the need for us to ask for it and to put any effort into that communication. And here's where the problem lies. Now, while it's important for us to be able to function without engaging our conscious thought into everything that we do, because it would require too much effort. I mean, we don't have to think about how to brush our teeth or how to tie our shoelaces or how to drive to work after programming these things by repetition, and indeed how to react to situations that are dangerous for us. We largely don't have any day-to-day influence over these things unless the behavior patterns are interrupted by something unexpected. For instance, how many times do we think about changing the route that we take to work if traffic conditions are considered favorable? We just play out the behavior patterns that we're used to. We follow the same path we've always followed because our subconscious has decided that we've had success in the past with this particular pattern. You've survived the trip before, so in all likelihood, you'll survive it again. Now, you'd only think about changing the route if something about the route makes you aware that there's a need to change it, like a traffic jam or an accident on the road. Now, this is great for useful behaviors and patterns like driving to work. But what about patterns that may not be useful or optimal? And these patterns have been programmed into us, so we have no conscious control of them. What if, for instance, our beliefs about relationships is suboptimal? So let's look at relationships in the same way. Let's consider that the office is our interaction with our partner and we need to get to the office. Now, we may have been programmed to interact with our partner in the same way our parents interacted with each other. And for argument's sake, let's say it's not the healthiest way to interact. So we argue about silly things. For instance, we don't compromise or we take everything that is said as criticism. Let's liken this behavior to the route that we take to work. Now, our exposure to our parents' interaction with each other is the route that we have learned to take because our parents survived their relationship. So in all likelihood, your mind will think if you follow the same path and the same behaviors as your parents, you'd survive your relationship too. Now, without anything drastic happening, you would follow this path automatically without question because arguing incessantly is the route to the office that you've been taught. So there's no need to change it without anything drastic happening. So now you're just following a program that the subconscious has communicated to you, and you would continue to do that until something drastic happens, the accident on the road to work, or in this case, your partner saying, "I've had enough and I want out." So that's when you start thinking of a different route to the office. So here's the problem. When the subconscious is communicated to, information going in, that information coming in is unfiltered and uncontrolled. And largely when the subconscious communicates with us, the information going out, it's not selective and it's also uncontrolled as well. So we have a situation where there's a two-way communication to and from the thing that holds all our programming without us having any real conscious control of that communication. So we're just really responding to something we're not even aware that we're responding to. So here's where understanding the brainwaves comes in. Now we know that there are tools to communicate with the subconscious in a more coherent and controlled way. The first method is hypnosis. Now we know that hypnosis can tap into the subconscious very well indeed. Under hypnosis, we can access long forgotten memories. So that's the outward communication. And we can install new beliefs, and that's the inward communication. And we have a good understanding of what's happening in the brain when we are under hypnosis. We know that the predominant frequencies seen in the brain is altered from our usual awakened state, the frequency of brain when we're awake and going about our day-to-day life. So we know that this is altered when someone's under hypnosis. So this altered state of consciousness and altered state of brainwaves is the key to opening the lines of communication to the old subconscious. Now, this altered state is a really good way for two-way communication, that is, in and out. The problem is that traditional hypnosis requires an external operator, the hypnotherapist or the hypnotist. And we ourselves are unable to control the information going in while we are in the hypnotic state. We can't even control the information going out, really. We'll deal with this issue later on in this program. But for now, it's just important to know that hypnosis is a really good way of communicating in and out with the subconscious, but we just don't have any real control over it. The second method that we know works really well to communicate with the subconscious is repetition of new information. Now, the more we repeat something, the more the subconscious takes notice of it and it gets programmed in. And the more you do it, the more strongly it gets programmed in. Now, this tends to be quite a tedious way to communicate with the subconscious because it takes time. Nevertheless, it's still very effective in the end. Now, this method of communication with the subconscious is largely one-way communication. All the information is really going in. I say that loosely because there's still going to be a response from the subconscious in terms of how it reacts to this information coming in. The third way to communicate with the subconscious is via imagery. Now, it can be argued that this is the native language of the subconscious. Now, this way of communicating is two-way. You can program in information this way, and the subconscious can communicate outwards in this way too. Now, we'll talk about this more when we look at dreams as a way to access information from the subconscious. So, we've got three methods, and individually, all these methods have their own shortcomings in terms of communication, whether that be the ability to communicate inwards or the ability for the subconscious to communicate outwards. However, if we combined all these three methods together, so we combine being in an altered state and changing our brainwave frequency with using imagery and repetition, we can bring together all the positive elements of communication with the subconscious, and collectively they would fill in the gaps, the shortcomings of each individual method. Now, this is where an understanding of brainwaves comes in. As I mentioned before, during hypnosis, our usual brainwave frequencies are altered. Now, we know that we can actually replicate these altered frequencies quite easily, albeit with some practice. And we can do it in a way that doesn't relinquish our conscious awareness, so that we don't really need an external operator to communicate. Then, while we're in these altered states, we can apply the two other communication modes, the imagery and repetition, so that we can install the programming that we choose rather than the programming that is imposed on us. Now, over the next few weeks, we'll be doing some awareness exercises, and we'll learn to meditate in a very special way that allows us to tap into the different brainwave frequencies in a reliable way, so that we can use the inherent qualities of each of the different brain frequencies to communicate inwards and outwards with the subconscious. And wonderful things will happen when we do that. So we'll learn to instruct our subconscious to bring out our innate creativity. We'll teach ourselves to connect more deeply with others because we will no longer be beholden to our old programming, especially about how we deal with other people. We'll also open the channels to intuition, which isn't as woo-woo as we used to think. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that intuition is very real and very accessible to everyone. We'll also increase our empathy by learning to communicate non-verbally with other people, and we'll look at evidence of this in terms of telepathic communication. Yes, There is some scientific evidence for this, and we'll be able to develop this as well. We'll also be able to develop spiritually if this is your interest. Now, keep an open mind on these last two. You'll get peripheral benefits even if you don't completely buy into them. Now, more importantly, you're going to be able to change your reality because your internal programming has changed. And so that means that the things you notice and the things you believe about yourself and your abilities will have changed. So I'm not talking about being able to fly because your belief has changed, but your living experience will change because the new programming that you've installed yourself according to your needs and priorities will determine what you notice and what you prioritize in your life and what you're able to achieve. And again, this is according to your needs and priorities and not according to what you're exposed to. So I hope this sounds good to you, because to me, it's the holy grail of living, being in total control of your living experience. Obviously, this will take some time, but using the techniques that you'll learn in this program, the process will be quite easy. Okay, let's go back to the brainwaves. Let's talk about the different brainwaves and their qualities. Now, it's important to emphasize that we generate all brainwaves all of the time and in different parts of our brain. But at different times, we generate predominantly one brainwave more than the others, depending on what we're doing and what we're focusing on. So, first of all, let's talk about beta brainwaves. Now, this is the brainwave that we are most familiar with as adults. We spend a majority of our time generating beta brainwaves in our waking hours. Beta brainwaves have a fast frequency, 13 to 32 cycles per second, or 13 to 32 hertz. Now, it is the brainwave signature of being awake and alert. So anything that requires conscious concentration, for instance, listening to me, although arguably that may put you to sleep, which is a whole other brainwave, learning, talking, doing tasks that require thinking and problem solving, and deciding on things that require an analysis of facts. All of these require beta brainwaves to be predominantly present. The next one is the alpha brainwave. Now that is slower, and it has a frequency of around 8 to 13 hertz. Now, alpha brainwaves are slower, and they are present when we are mentally and physically relaxed. Now, while these brainwaves are slower than the beta brainwaves, they are actually the strongest brainwaves, and they are the most easily detected, hence the name alpha, which is the first of the Greek alphabet. And because the alpha brainwaves were the first to be discovered almost a century ago, they're named after the first Greek alphabet. And this is because they're so strong that the crude equipment in the past was able to detect them easily. Now, when we're producing predominantly alpha brainwaves, we are in a daydreamy state. We're very receptive to programming. It's almost a hypnotic state, but with practice and awareness, here's that word again, awareness, comes up a lot in this program, we will be able to be consciously aware of information going in and out of the subconscious, unlike in a true hypnotic state and experience. Now, this wave is generated when we're relaxed, when we're doing something repetitive but relaxing, and also when we're engaged in artistic or creative activities, and also just before we fall asleep. Now, even slower still, at 4 to 8 hertz, are the theta brainwaves. Now, because they are slower, we experience a much more reduced state of consciousness. So at beta, we're wide awake, we're super conscious. At alpha, the consciousness is reduced, but we still have a little bit more conscious awareness, but not as much as beta. And as the brainwaves slow down to theta, our consciousness is reduced. Now, in this state, we have access to insight and dreams, and also a much more open channel to our subconscious, but at the expense of conscious control. This is the brainwave that we predominantly produce when we are under hypnosis. But it also happens in very deep meditation amongst very experienced meditators, and also when we're in a deep daydreaming state and when we tune out while we're awake. So this happens when we are doing something so automatic that we can completely disengage from our conscious mind. So think about going into a nice hot shower at the end of a long cold day, and we're just in the shower and we're enjoying the bliss of it, and we tune out, and then all of a sudden we've been there for 20 minutes and we don't know what we've done. So this is when the theta brainwaves will spike. Now, theta brainwaves are also very important in our psychological well-being and our psychological health. And we'll talk about this further on, especially when we discuss theta brainwaves in detail. Then finally, well, not finally, but finally for this program, we have the delta brainwaves. These are very, very slow, 0.5 to 4 hertz. Now, because they are very slow, we don't really have any conscious awareness as far as we know in this state. Now, delta brainwaves are associated with sleep and also physical healing and rejuvenation. Right? We don't know much about what's happening at delta because we are not conscious of it. But remember that all brainwaves occur all the time. So delta brainwaves are there while we're awake. So part of the aim of this program is to be able to spike delta brainwaves and harness the qualities of delta brainwaves, which is physical healing and rejuvenation, while we're still awake. So as you can see, each brainwave has a specific function associated with it. And by tapping into these functions, we can utilize them in a conscious way. Theta and delta, brainwaves that we use for healing. So we're going to try to actively generate, well, I say try, but we're going to learn to actively generate them when we want. And then we can use the healing abilities to accelerate healing at any time, rather than waiting for it to happen when we're asleep. Now, that's just one of the many applications that we will go through over the coming weeks as we break down the different brainwaves and how to harness their qualities. Now, although we're not focusing or even really learning about this particular brainwaves, there are another two brainwaves that we may want to know about, and you can certainly go and look these up. But they are outside the scope of this program. So the first one is gamma. Now, gamma we know a little bit more about, not as much as the last few brainwaves, but gamma we know is a very fast brainwave, 32 to 100 hertz. So that's a really frenetic brainwave. Now, it's associated with heightened perception. Some people say clairvoyance and heightened problem solving. Now, they tend to be much stronger in long-term meditators. At the moment, I am not aware of a training strategy to cultivate and tap into these particular waves apart from long-term meditation. And unfortunately, this program is only 3 months long. Now, the average person will produce gamma brainwaves, but not consistently and not in a way that is controlled. So this brainwave is definitely outside of the scope of this program. But by learning to control the other brainwaves, you will still be able to do everything that you need or want to do in terms of personal development. Now, the last two brainwaves are lambda and epsilon. Our equipment at this stage is only just sensitive enough to detect these, and we know next to nothing about them. So they are also outside the scope of this program. So that was the summary of what's coming up in the next few weeks. And tomorrow we'll do a meditation exercise that will start us on the road to learning self-hypnosis and learning to connect with these different brainwaves. And each week for the next few weeks, our webinar will focus on the different brainwaves and how to tap into them. As I said, it's a very big subject and it will take a couple of weeks for us to really do a deep dive into the brainwaves. For now, though, I wish you a great weekend and I'll see you tomorrow.